My talk today will be about feedback. I'm an automatic control engineer, an electrical engineer by training, and I will try to give a brief introduction to what feedback is and where you can find it in daily life. As you can see, I have a sort of double affiliation. I'm the head of the Automatic Control Lab and a director of NCCR Automation. I will give a very brief introduction to both of these. I guess they're not household names. One is the Automatic Control Laboratory. This is a lab at ETH Zurich, my home institution. And as you can see, it comprises 3 professors and a number of senior scientists, postdoctoral researchers, doctoral students, and so on and so forth. It's a fairly big lab, about 63 people work there. And you can see in the bottom, people come from all over the world. It's a very international environment. Day-to-day language is English, and we attract talent from all over the world to join us and work with us. There's a QR code here. If people are interested, they can scan and visit our webpage. The other thing that's in the lab is the management team of the NCCR Automation. I will show you in a minute who they are. The NCCR Automation, my second affiliation of sorts, is a center, a national center, funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation and ETH Zurich. And as you can see, it's a fairly big center. There's about 30 professors. You can see all of them here, and about 80 researchers that are active in the center. Myself, I'm a control engineer, I'm the director, but people come from all sorts of walks of life. My co-director is a power systems person. There are people who do operations research. There are people who look into manufacturing, ethics, and philosophy, economics, and so on and so forth. So it's a very broad interdisciplinary community. The first item of business in the center is research, of course. This is a map of our research efforts. On the left is the biggest part, which is the theory, control theory, automation theory. We call it automation enablers. On the right is a second big part, which is applications. It's written in German, but basically we're looking at sustainability-related applications into energy, mobility, and advanced manufacturing processes. And in between the two is a link to society. This is where the people who work, for example, on ethics, trust, fairness, and so on work. So it's trying to bridge the theory with the applications by linking to society. But we don't only do research, we also work on other aspects related to automation, and this is what the management team does. These are the people that I mentioned earlier. They look into issues that have to do with equal opportunities, access to underrepresented minorities. We run a podcast, we run a continuing education program, we look into open access publications, technology transfer, outreach to the community, we run a public campaign, and so on and so forth. You can find out more. We're present on all the social media, and I have a QR code here for a link tree that will take you to our webpage and all the different activities that we do. Now, on to the main course. I'll talk about automatic control. That's my field of expertise, and I will introduce it very briefly. This is a topic that's very much at the heart of what you read in the newspapers as AI, digitalization, cyber-physical systems. All of these buzzwords, I will say, refer to something very close to automatic control. This is what happens when the digital worlds meet the physical world. So when you say that, most people think of data science and machine learning. That's sort of, in the popular press, that's what you hear most of the time. That's a very important part of this equation. This is what you use to make sense of the physical world. You collect data from the world, and then you run machine learning or other data processing algorithms to turn that into information. So you translate data from the physical world into information in the IT world. That's a very important part that you need to do to make something useful with the data. But at the end of the day, you want to make something useful. You want to make a difference to the world. And that's what automatic control does. Automatic control closes the loop here. It takes the information that you generated through the data, computes what you should be doing to make the world better, and then applies whatever you should be doing to the world. So we argue that this is what makes a difference to the world. That's what automatic control is all about. How do you do that? How do you make sure that whatever information you pass on to the real world is actually useful and it's going to do something good? That's feedback. This is a very simple principle, but it's ubiquitous. You find it everywhere. It's a very simple idea. It's very easy to explain. The idea is the following. You have a system. Your system could be, for example, a car that you, in autonomous driving, you want to drive. And you have some desired state of the car. I should be traveling down the highway at 80 kilometers per hour, which is my desired speed, so I get to my destination. To get this desired behavior, you have access to a number of inputs. This is the throttle, the gas pedal, the brakes, the gears, the steering wheel, and so on and so forth. And you can measure a number of outputs. You look out the window and you see where you are on the road and where you want to. Okay? Now, one easily can think, yes, you can just apply the steering wheel inputs to the steering wheel and so on and so forth. If you do that, if you think about blindly closing your eyes and trying to do that, of course, you will not be able to drive your car safely and reliably. Feedback is the idea of you look at where you are, you compare it with where you want to be, and you use the difference between the two, where you are and where you should be, to generate the inputs. So instead of, in an open loop way, pushing the car down the road, you constantly look at where you are, you constantly think about where you want to be, and you constantly correct for any mistakes you make. A very simple idea, but it's very powerful. This feedback loop is really what makes systems autonomous. This is really what makes systems intelligent. This is really what makes systems robust. So in the newspapers, you read a lot about smart grids and intelligent highway systems, autonomous driving, smart home, smart this, intelligent that, Industry 4.0, whatever. All of these things, whatever refers to intelligent, smart, autonomous, really under the hood is what I just described: feedback, control, and automation. If you do it right, it works well. No one even knows it's there. It's the hidden technology, we call it. If it works well, you don't even know it's working. You notice when it doesn't work well. This is an old video from the 1980s. This is a Saab Gripen coming into land. This is a control loop, which refuses to start. Okay, I don't know how to start my video. Maybe this will do it. Yep. And you see what happens. This is a control loop going unstable, we call it. It looks very scary, but actually the pilot walked away. This was a test flight, so a professional pilot in it. And you see what is happening. There's oscillations that are increasing in amplitude as the airplane approaches the ground. This is a system, a control system that has been designed poorly in a sense. It went unstable and caused this disaster. So you want to avoid this. You want to design your control systems in a way that avoid this kind of undesirable behavior. Okay, how do you do this? You need three things to come together. You need theory, you need control theory, you need to understand how the system works, you need to understand what to say to do the right thing. You need computation, because most control systems are now controlled through computers in the IT world, so you need to understand how computation works. And then you need to go over to the applications. In this talk, I will mostly concentrate on the applications, because that's the most relatable and perhaps interesting for a wider audience part. I will talk about energy, I will talk about biology applications. But if you ask me what do we do in our daily life, actually most of the time we work on theory. So methods, development of methods. I will not talk about this because when you open a control paper, after the first introduction that says what I'm doing will save the world, you find things like this. If you look at this, it looks like an eyesore to most people. That's why I'm not going to talk about it. But to control engineers, it's actually a thing of beauty. These are the equations that go into actually the energy application I will talk about in a few minutes. This is what we use to control these energy systems, the mathematics behind it. The second part is computation. You need to link this theory to the real world to make sure that it carries over. If you look into the appendix or the supplementary material of the paper, you find something like this. Again, this looks dreadful to most people. This is not from one of my papers. This is from a colleague's paper. But actually, this is what you need to make the bridge. And this is actually a necessary step to make sure that whatever design you did, whatever guarantees you obtain in theory, actually carry over to the application. And then if you play your cards right, you make something useful. So I'll try to explain some of these hopefully useful things that we've been trying to do with feedback, starting with applications to energy systems. Okay, so my first application in energy will be around something called the energy hub. What is an energy hub? You can think of, for example, a campus, the campus of the University of Tokyo. campus of the University of Tokyo comprises a number of buildings. The buildings have needs in terms of heating and cooling and electricity that they need to serve during the day and during the night. The campus has access to the local grids, the electricity grid, usually a gas grid as well. In Switzerland, I don't know if it's common in Japan, you also have access sometimes to a heating grid, so you can draw heating from the communal heating. And then you have access to a number of devices that are located on the campus. And these devices can be used to convert energy from one form into another. For example, a heat pump that converts electricity to heat, or a boiler that converts gas to heat. Or some of the devices may be able to generate energy, like photovoltaics in the roofs of the buildings that generate electricity. And some of the devices can be used to store energy, like a battery or a water tank, hot water tank. Or if you're very adventurous and very rich, you can buy yourself an electrolyzer, store the hydrogen, and then pass the hydrogen through a fuel cell on a rainy day when you don't have photovoltaics, and use that electricity instead of buying electricity from the grid. Now, if you think about it, this is a very complicated feedback system. At any point in time, you need to measure the state of your system, what your energy demand is, and what you have access to. And then you need to make decisions, operational decisions, like do I buy electricity, do I sell electricity, where do I store electricity, and so on and so forth. Right? And this is complicated by the fact that you don't only need to decide now, but you also need to look into the future. What will happen, what will my needs be in the future, so that I can preemptively store energy, electricity, for example, so that I have it when I need it later. So I'll present two case studies that we have performed on systems like this, where you have access to storage devices, generation devices, conversion devices, and you want to meet your demands in the most efficient way. The first one is in Switzerland. It's a village called Zurich. It's up in the Alps. You see the altitude here. It's a pretty cold place, a small village, a few buildings and a few inhabitants, but it's pretty cold. And at some point, the village of Zurich decided they would see what it takes to go off-grid. Do they really need electricity and gas and so on from the main grids, or can they autonomously operate with their local resources? So they went to EMPA. EMPA is our sister lab. It's over the hill from ETH Zurich. It's a federal lab of the Swiss government. And they asked EMPA to do a study about what would it take to go off-grid. What do we need to buy to meet our local demand? And EMPA came up with this design here. You need to buy a number of boilers so you can burn the wood chips that you generate locally, heat pumps, fuel cells, electrolyzers, photovoltaics, blah, 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 blah. All of this gadgetry, right? Among all of this gadgetry, of course, you need storage. You need storage because photovoltaics produce during the day, but not during the night. So you need, for example, a battery, short-term storage to store your electricity. And photovoltaics produce in the summer, but not in the winter. So you also need long-term storage to transfer energy from the summer to the winter. And this could be in hydrogen, or this could be in thermal storage by heating the ground. Now, this causes a problem. The problem is the following. This graph on the left shows the properties of the two types of storage you have. Seasonal storage, the red curve, there's a lot of loss if you pass a round trip through a hydrogen electrolyzer fuel cell chain. You lose about half your energy, but it's very stable. Once you store it, you have it there effectively forever. Short-term storage, like a battery or a water boiler, is the opposite. You have very high efficiency in the short term. If you put it in and you extract it in a couple of hours, you get most of it back. But if you leave it there for a couple of weeks, you've lost most of it through self-discharge. So you lose it. Now, the problem is that to make use of the seasonal storage, you need very long preview. You need to think a year ahead of time. I will possibly need this in the summer or half a year in the winter. Now I have it, but then in the winter I won't. And this very long preview makes for a very complicated feedback problem. You need to think every 15 minutes and predict a year ahead of time. Just the number of decisions you need to make is mind-boggling. You will never be able to do. What we tried to do was to break this long-term, short-term storage by using data. So the solution that we came up with was to give long-term preview to our short-term myopic decisions was to use a clairvoyant controller. The clairvoyant controller takes historical data and pretends that it knows the future perfectly. So you have a simple optimization problem that says, if I know that the next year is going to look exactly like this, which is a year from the past, so you know exactly what the year from the past looked like, what decisions would I have made at this point in time? You do this for many years, you collect data from, you see here a number of years, 8 years, then you see that you observe when you solve this problem optimally as though you knew the future perfectly, you obtain a very consistent pattern. You have to store energy at the end of the summer so that you can use it in your long-term storage, so that you can use it during the winter when you don't have photovoltaics. And then in the springtime, you want to have drained completely this energy because whatever you leave in there is loss. You've lost half of it by storing it. So you see the range of conditions is very narrow. So this gives you, in your myopic problem, a terminal condition. It says at this point in time, when you predict like 3, 4, 5 days into the future, you would expect to have more or less this much energy in your seasonal storage. So this gives your myopic controller long-term preview, and that allows you to make very good decisions. This is work done a few years back by two of my colleagues, Yorgos Daravianakis and Annika Eichler, who now have moved on to bigger and better things. This is using historical data from the 8 years that I had before and testing on unseen years, other years out of sample, so we don't overfit our controller. And you see 100% is what you would burn. This is the amount of money they would need to operate their grid perfectly if they knew these years perfectly. If you ignore this long-term previewing, you just do myopic control, predicting 3 days into the future using weather forecasts and implementing every 15 minutes a new decision. So predict 3 days, play for 15 minutes, implement your decision for 15 minutes, predict another 3 days, another 15 minutes, etc., etc. You lose 13%. So you lose a substantial fraction of money. 13% is non-trivial on this sum. It's a small village, remember. When you do what we said in the previous slide, which is give long-term preview to the short-term controller, to the myopic controller, then you get a much better performance. You lose 2 out of 1,000, 0.2%. So without knowing the future perfectly, you can nonetheless make decisions that seem very near to what you would have done had you known the future perfectly. So that's very encouraging. So it works very well for this system. So that's one use case in the area of energy, where we try to use this long-term, short-term forecasting to make better decisions for this village in the Alps. Then we got adventurous and we thought, okay, if it works in the Alps, maybe it works elsewhere. And the next case study is in a very different place. It's in a university in Ghana. This is a university that ETH Zurich collaborates with in a master's program. And these people in the picture here are two of the master's students that did their master's thesis on looking at the energy system of the university and trying to make it work better. So the idea is to reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their electricity bill by harnessing local electricity production. You see the photovoltaics perhaps on the slide here on the roof of the buildings. They produce 13% of their electricity through photovoltaics. They're trying to increase this to 60%. And they want to complement it with local storage so that you meet your demand in the evening where the photovoltaics don't produce, and also ride out the grid outages because the grid in Ghana is quite unreliable. There's several hours of outage every day. So they want to reduce their reliance on diesel generators that they currently use to generate electricity when they don't have the grid. They also look at other more adventurous things like mobility and water and sewage systems, which I will not talk about today. Now, Ghana is very different from Switzerland in more ways than one. You see, for example, temperatures and sunshine. Blue is Switzerland, orange or red or whatever that is Ghana. Very steady temperatures. Switzerland, very wildly varying temperatures. Sunshine, they have a rainy season and a dry season, more sunshine in the dry, less in the rainy. But you see it aligns with the temperatures, and so cooling is their main load for the campus. So this is actually very good conditions to have. You don't need seasonal storage, for example, so the previous discussion is out the window. You see electricity is a bit more cheap in Ghana as well, not as cheap as you would think it should be, but it is cheaper. This is something we can touch upon in the discussion. It's actually very important for investment point of view. Cheap electricity is bad when you make an investment in hardware. So this works against us, the fact that electricity is cheap. But there is hope. Electricity is cheap, but there's two aspects, very local, that actually make a difference in how the system behaves. The first aspect is that in Ghana, there are no so-called feed-in tariffs. There is no net metering. If you produce more electricity than you consume, you cannot do anything with it. You have to shed it. You have to throw it away. This is showing one of the buildings in the campus. The purple curve is what the building would have produced in photovoltaics had it been able to produce at the maximum capacity. The black curve is what it actually produced. Under the black curve is actually the demand of the building, is what it consumed. So you see, what it produced is exactly what it consumed. All of this area here is wasted electricity. You could have produced this much, but you didn't because you have nothing to do with it. You have to shed it. So you're wasting money here. The other place where you're wasting money, I mentioned already, is the unreliable grid. The grid goes off every now and then. To make sure they have electricity on the campus, they use diesel generators. This is the fraction of electricity they get from the diesel generator. Not very much, but diesel is very expensive, so there's a lot of money being wasted here, and it produces a lot of carbon, is the plot you see on the bottom right. So they want to do away with the carbon footprint and reduce the reliance on the electricity, on the diesel generator. So the solution for this is buy a battery. Buy a big enough battery so you can store this extra electricity and use it instead of using the diesel when your grid goes off. I won't talk about this in detail. This is the work of a third master student, Kobena, that did his master's last year. This is showing the outages of the grid and how you can exploit the battery to ride out the outages of the grid without actually buying unnecessary electricity or burning any diesel. The important part is on the next slide. This is how much money you're saving by doing this. So on this day, they could have saved a pretty substantial 40% of their bill by generating electricity that would have otherwise gone to waste and reducing the reliance on diesel. This looks great. You think, okay, 40% of their bill, that's much better than even Cernez. We can talk about why this is not as great as it seems. It has to do with economics, it has to do with politics, it has nothing to do with technology. Technology is great, but this is a very expensive investment, buying batteries and photovoltaics. And because of the financial conditions in Ghana, it's not even clear that you can make ends meet on this investment. Even if you save so much, this is admittedly on a very good day with many outages. Okay, so that's my story on electricity. And in my last 5 minutes, I'll talk about something very different, which is biology. This is about feedback loops in biology. And you may know homeostasis. People who are interested in biology know this. Is the feedback loops that our body, for example, uses to control respiration, our heart rate. There's lots of feedback loops automatically encoded in our bodies. But there's also feedback loops that people try to engineer into cells. For example, to produce antibiotics or to produce biofuels and so on. So they try to genetically engineer the cells to do something useful. People have tried to do this for many years. You see some old papers here where they try to engineer simple functionality into cells. This is something very difficult to do in practice. In theory, it works very well. In the lab, it sort of works. In the wild, it mostly doesn't. And the reason for this is that cells have a mind of their own. You engineer biofuel production into them, you give them a lot of food, and you expect them to produce a lot of biofuels. But of course, cells haven't evolved to generate biofuels, they've evolved to generate more cells. So if you give them a lot of food, they eat the food and have babies, quote unquote, not strictly speaking. So then you get a lot of cells, a lot of biomass, and not a lot of biofuel. So you're wasting your feed on generating unnecessary cells. So what we tried to do was to actually try to regulate these feedback loops externally. So we built a system that artificially, through a computer, tries to control gene expression in living cells. You have a bioreactor in the middle where the cells live. The cells have a genetic circuit that produces a fluorescent protein that you can measure using an instrument called the flow cytometer. And then you can use this signal as a feedback to decide to shine light on the cells. These are photoreceptive cells, optogenetics, so to speak, shine light in different frequencies to activate or deactivate the gene expression. So you can try to regulate the gene expression exactly at the level you want. How can you do this? First of all, you need some biology. We're not biologists. We went to a biologist friend and we borrowed some cells from them. some cells that are responsive to light at different frequencies. Red frequency activates gene expression and produces a fluorescent protein. Far red light deactivates gene expression, then natural degradation removes the fluorescent. You need some electronics, LEDs to control the cells, power supplies, blah, 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 blah. And you need some control, some feedback, some mathematics. You start with chemical reactions. I will not go through the details. This is the fundamental dogma in biology. DNA produces mRNA. mRNA produces protein. The protein folds and fluoresces, and everything decays in the end. This you can translate into mathematics. These are differential equations, like the ones I showed in an earlier slide as a joke. It's not a joke. It's actually really what a chemist or a chemical engineer or a control engineer would model these reactions with. And then you can do this predictive control that I also used for exactly the same method I used for energy systems to regulate energy demand. Here it is in action. On the left, we tell the cells to regulate to 7-fold what they would normally be doing this protein, so produce 7 times as much protein as they would produce normally. If you give them a command and say, do 7, your model predicts that they will do this gray curve. But in reality, because the cells react, like I said, they have a mind of their own, they end up doing the green curve. So you actually do not get 7-fold production. If you do feedback, you constantly measure, you constantly correct, you constantly tell them to do something different. You use this very complicated light sequence, but it's computed automatically. You don't have to think about it, and you get the orange curve. So you get a much better performance. You get your 7-fold expression much more robustly. You see, I told them to do 4 here. Again, worked like a charm. Whereas if I just tell it, do this, they do something that they think is a good idea, but it's not what I wanted them to do. So this we coded in our cells, and we wrote a very nice paper in Nature Biotech a few years ago. And then, being a control engineer and a complete nerd, I'm not used to this. A reporter called me and wanted to talk to me about this paper. This reporter was called Jason Palmer from the BBC. And then he wrote an article on the BBC website. It appeared a couple of days later. It was during the financial crisis in Greece. So there was a picture of George Papandreou, our prime minister at the time, just above it. They had declared we were bankrupt. And then below it was this paper that talked about cyborg yeast. This is a term that Palmer quoted, which ended up to be very catchy. So 3 days later, if you Googled cyborg yeast, there were thousands and thousands of hits. And then there were articles that were reproducing in layman's terms what we did, and a number of other articles that didn't quite get the point, like articles relating this to Star Trek and the Borg and how we will be assimilated if we keep doing stuff like this, or articles that said, why don't you brew better beer with this? Why are you wasting your time with biofuels and things like that? So that's it. That's the end of my talk. I gave you a brief introduction to my field. This is automatic control in the middle. I didn't tell much about the theory or the computation because it's not particularly exciting for most people. I tried to emphasize the application. It's a field that touches upon computer science on the one side, through the computation, machine learning, and so on, and applied mathematics on the other. And a number of application areas. I hinted at transportation. I talked about energy and biology, but there's many, many, many others in economics, you name it. It is really everywhere. So I'll leave you with this parting thought. I mentioned it already. Wherever you see intelligent, autonomous, smart, whatnot, this really means under the hood, you will find what we do. You'll find feedback, control, and automation. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, John. So feedback controls are everywhere. We just don't see some of those. So people can start thinking about the question you will ask. But in the meantime, let's ask Hajime to talk about or to give his comments on this.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring talk. And actually, I'm working on robotics, as Hoshi-sensei introduced. And so it means that I'm a user of automatic control. And in general, automatic control is a little bit difficult discipline. It looks very difficult discipline because there are so much math. And it's really difficult to catch up the theory sometimes. But so maybe feedback is the most basic idea of automatic control. And so you explain so that the people can understand this concept very easily. So I really appreciate your talk. And so maybe first question I'd like to ask is a kind of, so maybe what kinds of control mechanisms do you think exist in society? Of course, today you introduced many applications of automatic control in society. But it looks like you are just applying this kind of automatic control technologies to kind of systems where which obeys some kind of physical laws. But in general, in society, there are lots of things which does not obey the physical laws, such as human or any kind of economical systems. And sometimes they might be a little bit difficult to be modeled in mathematical way. So maybe I'd like to listen to your comments on this kind of very general, the feedback in society.
Yeah, so indeed, that's a sort of hinted at applications to economics, for example. Many systems, I talked about technology, I talked about engineering applications for the most part, biology to the life science, but similar idea. Many of the applications don't fit exactly into this mold of do a model from first principles from physics, which is the case in energy and in biology, or in chemistry in the case of biology, and then just apply your standard methods. But even in social systems, there is, you can apply control theory methods. Some, especially in economics, for example, there are fundamental principles and conservation laws that you can fall back on and develop fundamental models. A sort of game theory, for example, which closely relates to automatic control, something I spend a lot of my time doing. So you can have, for example, social systems where you model them in a game theoretic context. In the energy, this could be a simple, you have people who consume energy and you want to give them incentives to consume at different times so that you help the grid, the national grid cope in a case of excess demand. So you could have game theory methods where you capture how people, through utility functions, how they react, and you try to give them the right incentives or the right information to help them make decisions that will help the overall grid.
Okay.
And there's even more, there's a lot of things like this. There's people who work with cognitive psychologists and try to model humans, for example, for human-in-the-loop systems, where you have pilots or air traffic controllers who respond in unpredicted ways. You try to model them, thanks to the cognitive psychologists, through simple Markov chains, like automata, so to speak, with probabilities. And then you make decisions, you include them in your decision-making algorithm, and you analyze them to predict what is the probability that something will go wrong, that the human will make a mistake, that you give them information that causes them to make a mistake and prevent things from like this from happening. So you can also use it in other domains where it's really, there's very few physics first principle laws to fall back on.
Okay.
Let me jump in here because I'm an economist and I think about these a lot. Try to apply control theory to regulate the economy, and that can be done. I think theoretically it can be done, but it's tough, as you understand. And I guess one of the toughest thing we have in economics or in social science is that the people can behave not in unpredictable way if they decide to, right? They have a free will not to behave as they usually behave, right? So that seems to be a difficulty, even more difficult than the regulating cells.
Yep.
They have their own will, but the human seems to have, or human have their own will, and they have a will to go against regulation. So
true. Yeah. But if I may comment, indeed, this is true. And actually, for human-in-the-loop systems, where you have the humans mixing in with the decisions, that's the nightmare of most control engineers. Control engineers don't like humans because they don't do what you tell them, unlike engineering systems. But actually, like I was hinting, there are things you can still do, even in a case like this. Sometimes you rely on large numbers where things become much more predictable. When you go to individuals, it's clearly much worse. But then if you think about more, how
aggregate economy.
Aggregate is much easier because you rely on aggregation and law of large numbers to get actually a reasonable prediction.
Right.
But even for individuals, you think of, how does Netflix serve you movies and how does Google serve you ads? And there's this joke that says, with 3 likes, they know you better than your wife. With 5, they know you better than yourself. So actually, there are sort of, humans are perhaps, not as unpredictable sometimes as we'd like to think.
More controllable than we think.
Yeah.
Hajime, do you
Okay, thank you. So, and maybe the next question I prepared is a kind of, what kinds of control mechanisms do you think need to be designed to create a better society? It's very general, and it is also related to the previous questions. But what I'd like to ask you is a kind of, what is the challenge in automatic control for better society? That is, I'm very much curious.
Yeah. So this is actually one of the difficult issues when you try to move. Also think about the implications of your control systems in a social context. Even applications, energy applications, the simplest applications often have very unpredictable consequences when you deploy the automation in practice. So one big aspect is what they call in the field trust and robustness and safety. So you need to, and that's what the mathematics is about, that's what the computer science is about. You need to be able to provide some kind of confidence that your system will not do something very unpredictable, will not do something wild and cause harm. Right? But when you go beyond that, you very quickly end up in very difficult questions that philosophers and economists have struggled with for years. Ethics and things like this. And that's something that I am very preoccupied by at the moment through the center. And I know you are also here in Japan with your projects. And I think it is difficult questions like, if you ask, okay, now we formed this energy community, the energy hub, and we're making a profit. Who should get this profit? And how should you do it? Very simple question, huh? And then you ask 2 different people and you get 2 different opinions. And very quickly it boils down to utilitarian theories and deontological theories in ethics, or people in economics have been grappling with how to spread the pie among different contributors and so on and so forth. And this we don't have good answers for.
Okay.
This is something that we grapple with as much as everyone else. This is not something that engineering is perhaps the right way to provide the right answer. What we are looking at is how can we encode these considerations into our engineering design. But these fundamental questions about what is fair and they're very difficult to answer. What we're doing is, how do you make systems that respect this notion of fairness? But if your notion of fairness is different from mine, my system cannot do anything about that.
Yeah, it's quite diverse. Okay, thank you. Maybe last question might be the say AI matters. So how do technologies such as generative AI affect automatic control? So please explain the potential benefits and risks. Maybe you just mentioned that. So AI is a kind of buzzword already, but many people. Many researchers are using AI. So without AI, we cannot do research anymore. But there are lots of positive and negative impacts. So I'd like to ask your comments and opinions.
Yeah, I mean, of course, AI is a very big, broad, and it touches upon many things. I'll just talk about from control point of view specifically, automatic control, my field. So in our field, there are some that think that we'll be out of business very soon because you'll just ask ChatGPT, make him a system that does this, and it will do it, write the software and everything. So that's not very good for our job security, but I am not among those. I don't think it's as easy as that, especially when you want, what I was saying before, trust and safety and robustness. It's quite a bit more complicated than asking ChatGPT to do it. But I do see a great potential for us. And this goes back to what we were saying before about human-in-the-loop systems. And because generative models are very good at interacting with humans. So they're very good at extracting information from the humans. So if you want to know what the human is thinking, what the human is planning, what the human would like, it's a very good way as a sensor to extract this information. And they're very good at explaining to humans why a decision was made. And that goes to interpretability, and that goes to other things that generate trust, for example. So I see great potential in building into when you go to social systems, building in these generative technologies into our control loops. I don't think we can replace completely what we do by them, but we can use them to integrate, make a full loop together with the humans, explaining to them what they should be doing and why, and extracting information, guessing whether they have understood what the situation is, or whether they're about to make a mistake, warning them, and including them in the decision-making process, which I think can be extremely valuable and a very difficult problem for control theorists, engineers, forever, that maybe we're at a point of cracking now with these tools that are coming in play.
So I got a question from the audience, which exactly relates to this question, this point, which you partially answered. But the main part of the question is, how do you think, do you think it would be feasible to incorporate AI agents into the feedback system?
Yep.
So yes.
Very much so, very much so. A very simple example is what I just said, for interacting with users, for interacting with pilots, for interacting with humans in the loop.
And you think it's a promising way?
I think that is very promising. There's actually very close connections with machine learning as well in control theory. I sort of hinted at that in my slides. Indeed, some of the problems are duals of each other. There's people, in one of the terms that's used extensively in machine learning is the reinforcement learning. This is where you learn how to drive a system by interacting with it. You give it some command, you give it a decision, and then you see what it does, and then you give it a better decision reacting to what it did. So you are reacting to what the system is doing, and the system is reacting to what you do.
So in a sense, you are learning about the system and controlling the system at the same time.
And this is something that's very much at the heart of machine learning. This is something where it's very much a feedback loop. You interact with the system interacts with you. And control engineers and people in machine learning AI have been grappling with this question from different perspectives. The language is different. We call it approximate dynamic programming. They call it reinforcement learning, but the considerations are very similar. And actually, I think the tools of automatic control, the tools of machine learning are very useful when you start deploying these AI agents on real systems. You need to understand what will they do when they attack with a real system. And I think we and people in reinforcement learning are developing the right tools for doing this.
Okay. So the next question I got is quite relevant to this one too. So the audience are doing a good job today. So when you introduce AI, or AI agent, that may make a feedback system more efficient or something. But what about trust, which is another thing you mentioned? So let's see, the question of trust looks, how does the question of trust look in an age of AI? There's one of the nightmare scenarios that the system getting out of control and developing their own purposes, and which are not consistent with human beings.
This is indeed. I will take a control theorist again perspective, because I'm a control theorist. I can help myself. So I'll take a control theorist perspective. I think control theorists have been thinking about this question for a long time. And for us, the buzzword nowadays, you call it trust. In our lingo, it's called robustness. This is when you design control systems, feedback loops, not only for your specific system that you're looking at the moment, but you try to make sure that they will also work for other systems that are not exactly the same as you planned. To take into account uncertainties, to take into account the fact that your model are not perfect, to take into account that you based your models on data and your data is not perfect. So there are methods in control theory for doing this, for making sure that what you design doesn't only work for your individual system, but also works nearby. And there are methods in computer science, formal methods that do exactly the same. Try to generate abstractions, and then you argue about the abstractions, making sure that it... I think what is the problem with this problem, it's a known trade-off that when you do that, you actually lose something. You lose in performance. If you tailor your design to a specific system, you can, of course, extract much more out of it. And people who do finance and so on, of course, care to extract the maximum. So they really want to go all out and they target this particular system. But the risk when you do that is you overfit your particular system. And when something even remotely different happens, you completely go out of control. And one can argue that in economics, you see that happening with high-speed trading and things like this, right? So this is something that when we start deploying AI agents, it's good to keep in mind. It's often forgotten because people go for performance. And if you read literature in the AI, in machine learning and so on, the lingo is very different. They try to do the best possible, the fastest convergence rate, the best this and that. This is all good, but we should keep in mind that sometimes we have to take a step back from this and suffer some losses perhaps in terms of the finances or the performance of the system to make sure that really extreme events don't happen that completely throw it out.
Right. So there's a parable of AI going wild and make everything in paper clips. that type of stuff.
There is a risk.
Right.
There is, and I cannot. I'm a control engineer, right? I don't know how realistic this risk is, but I do see the trend of let's max it out and just deploy hardcore, compute to it and then get the most out of our system. But I do see the risk that when you do that, you make it more fragile, and then you may suffer in the end.
So there seems to be a serious trade-off between efficiency, stability, robustness, trust, those things.
And I think this is unavoidable. I think this is not. I think if you want to trust your system, you have to accept perhaps suboptimal performance.
Right.
In quotes, suboptimal.
Okay. So there's another good question I'd like to turn into, which is about the feedback goes wrong. You had a movie, terrifying movie of feedback mechanism go wrong. So this question is that if the goal of feedback is to reduce the difference between where we are and where we want to be, why do some systems become unstable or start oscillating wildly instead of reaching a steady state or a targeted purpose? What's a root cause for instability, which we often see in economics? Right? The economic behavior fuels another economic behavior, which makes the things even worse than originally.
So this is what control engineers do for a living. That's exactly what we try to understand. Right? And what causes them to go unstable? There's many different reasons. You cannot say it's the system that's bad or the controller that's. It's really the combination of the two, and that's what we try to understand. What systems go with what controllers? What can you hook up to what so that you get
combination of those?
Yes, it's a combination. So, for example, the movie that I showed, this Gripen airplane, it's a very unstable airplane. It's a fighter plane, so it's really on the border of instability. It's very difficult to fly without a controller.
So that goes to efficiency.
Yes. So and the reason for that is that they want it to be extremely agile. So if you're in trouble, you have to get out of trouble quickly. It's a fighter plane, right? You can find yourself in very bad trouble in one of those. So it's really a very difficult system to control. It's very difficult to fly without a controller on board. So it's a nasty system that you try to make behave better because you want it to be. You design it to be nasty because you want this extra performance, right? It's really pushing it to the boundary of what we were saying. This was now the feedback was with the pilot, and the problem was that the automatic controller and the pilot were incompatible with each other. The pilot was thinking, he pulled the stick up, he was hoping that the nose will lift, but the controller was a bit sluggish, so he didn't feel the nose lifting, so he pulled up a bit harder, and then it overshot, and they said, oh, that's too much, pushed it down, not much seemed to happen because the controller is sluggish, pushed it down face. What happens when you try to take a shower and you burn yourself by playing with hot water, cold water? Because it's the delay. And then that caused the oscillation. It's called pilot-induced oscillation. So in that case, you can argue it's a bad system that you try to make better. Okay, in other cases, perhaps it's a good system and you just mess it up by the wrong controller. Now, economy, I don't know. I guess.
Yeah, the economy, the system itself is often unstable.
Yes, I think, if you think, people, stock market crashes, it's probably people panicking and just, it's a positive feedback loop that, is there because of the psychology of the people. But I mean, just on the economy, it's if you think about it, in some cases in the economy, we are ourselves engineering instability into the system. In the following sense, I mean, the economists are infatuated with growth, and we want, 2% growth in the developed countries, and the developing world, maybe 10%, right? And if you think about growth, growth is an unstable system. It is something that control engineers hate and try to avoid, right? But economists love. Now, a control engineer is appalled by something like this because you start thinking, okay, this is going to sooner or later hit some limit and break.
Yeah, unbounded growth is something we like.
Yes,
right?
and I know economists also, they saying, rethinking the growth imperative. Is really growth what we should? I don't know what the current thinking is, but for a control engineer, that sounds scary. And I know we want it I understand the economic reason why we want it, but it is an unstable system if you think about it.
Yeah, and another possibility is another potential problem is idea of the desirable state and achievable system. The state may be different, and we may have a wrong idea about the desirable state, which is not really achievable.
Yes.
And if you want to go there, the system may become unstable.
That is absolutely correct, and that's another thing that control engineers worry a lot about. Which it's actually a question I've worked myself for many years. Reachability, what is feasible? What can you hope to attain so that you don't go for unrealistic things? And that comes back to, understanding your system and understanding what are the possible things you can do with it. And once you know, then you can select the best among them. But before you know, you may be going for unreasonable and causing bad things to happen.
Okay, good. So that's a pessimistic note. But we need to watch out, so that we can have a better feedback system.
Exactly.
And so on. Hajime, do you want?
Actually, the stability is one of the most important topic in automatic control. They have discussed many years about how they analyze the stability in the systems. And I think there are a lot of things we can learn from this kind of theory, and how we can identify the stability of the systems. And so today we have not so much time, but maybe one example might be the negative feedback and the positive feedback. Positive feedback is a kind of system which is not stable. And so we usually make the, for example, in robotics, we try to design a kind of positioning systems. We design some kind of sensory systems and the controllers to control the degrees of freedom of the arms, and to achieve some kind of stability. But if there is a kind of positive feedback in the systems, it should be not stable. So this is one example that automatic control theory provides some kind of hints or how to understand the systems. So do you have any kind of comments on that?
Yeah, so stability is indeed perhaps the most studied and fundamental question that control engineers go for. And positive feedback is generally associated with instability, so the lack of stability. Not always. Sometimes you want positive feedback for performance, for example. Yeah, but this is very much what we worry about. And often the instability comes in unsuspecting ways. For example, in robotics, when you have robots interacting with a human, the robot itself may be passive, but because the human introduces extra energy to it, it may cause the controller to go unstable, because the combination of the robot which you designed and it seems to operate fine, and the human who is very reasonable but is not really accustomed to how the robot operates, causes this instability. And if you think about it, the airplane crashing was exactly this, a flight management system that by itself probably would have done pretty well, a pilot who by themselves probably would have done pretty well. You put the two together, and the energy that the pilot provided and the energy that the system provided in response went unbounded, and it caused this instability.
Yeah. So when I listen to some kind of stories from Hoshi Sensei in economical systems or social systems, there are a lot of these kind of systems where we call negative spiral existing in the systems, and that is quite similar to the positive feedback in the controller theory.
Yeah, there are lots of positive feedbacks that can lead to crisis and so on. So the ideal feedback system maybe is a one where the control and machines and human can walk each other and control each other. So we are running out of time. So thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Hajime.
Thank you.
And I think we had an exciting conversation.